Hello neighbor, I'm Robert Burns, and it's such a delight to be back with you for our coverage of the fifth and final and long-awaited installment of me sounding off on our illustrious Attorney General, James D. Buddy Caldwell. And I have taken a considerable break, and for those of you who have had the opportunity to go back and look at some of our previous features on Mr. Caldwell, particularly episode 3, entailing the outrageous witness tampering. I think you would have to agree that we are providing a portrayal to you of an attorney general who, well, let's just say is not going to be found to be the most ethical. In fact, I would go so far as to say that he is beyond just mild corruption. He is corrupt. And I'm going to provide further evidence of that to you in this episode, episode 5. And as I told you some time back, this one would involve me personally. And so naturally, I'm going to be able to give you a whole plethora of names of the Attorney General's office. And we're going to have video footage. And I think you're going to enjoy this episode. Now, let me begin by saying some of you may have gone and looked at the feature episode we had with regard to Dr. T.L. Ritchie. She is an interior design professor at LSU. At one time, she chaired the interior design department at LSU, and she serves as vice chairman of the Interior Design Board. And I presented that feature for a reason, because it portrays a very good friend of mine, Reverend Freddie Lee Phillips, basically going after or pursuing his belief that the executive director of the Interior Design Board, Miss Sandy Edmonds, was committing payroll fraud. And I'm just going to say he was not alone in those efforts. While he pursued it for the Interior Design Board, because Reverend Phillips, who works 4 jobs, he works for 4 vocations, works tirelessly, believes that you ought not be getting money for going around laying around on the beach, to go into Disney World, and yet Miss Edmonds was pulling in a $54,000 salary and doing just that. Claiming to be on the clock when in reality she was nothing more than on call, because she would have a cell phone with her. But let me just say this. Myself and Reverend Phillips dealt with Mr. Patrick Lowry. He was the Chief of Accountability of the Civil Service Department, and he said that because Miss Edmonds is unclassified, that he would be unable to pursue payroll fraud charges. However, he indicated to us that at least the evidence that he had, while he had not verified it, certainly lent credence to the fact that she was committing, in his words, blatant payroll fraud. So we did go to the Legislative Auditor's Office. We went there and we visited with Mr. Calvin Moore. In fact, we visited with him several times. We continued to gather payroll-related data related to Miss Edmonds. And Mr. Lowry at one point said, look, the only problem with going the Legislative Auditor's route is that it's going to take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years because they're that backed up. And he was right, as we would come to find out. So Mr. Lowry advised that we contact Paul Gates, who at that time was still with Channel 9, and so we did. And Mr. Gates came out. We're gonna break now and give you a little 30-second video clip of Channel 9 coming out. It was not just Paul Gates, but it was also David Spunt. And this was just some general footage they took. This was from the March of 2011 LALB meeting. So let's break for a moment and let's see how eerily quiet it is at the LALB as the cameraman shows up rather unexpectedly and begins filming the LALB. Let's take just a brief break for that 30-second clip.
Just exactly what it says. Sorry, let's see. It says that, sorry Anna, I didn't mean to do that before I started you. Let's see. Let's see, let me just start reading and I'll find it. Let's see, out loud. If the applicant of renewal of a license has not been made, the license shall expire on December 31st, and it shall be illegal for any person to represent or act as an auctioneer thereafter. Any auctioneer who submits a renewal application after January 1st shall be subject to a late penalty of $75, which shall be paid to the...
All right, so you've seen the little 30-second clip. Well, I'll just let you know that Miss Sandy Edmonds, the executive director of the LALB, as well as the attorney for the LALB, who set up this whole payroll fraud setup for Miss Edmonds, they weren't real pleased with the fact that, hey, we got a major television news reporter coming in to look into this. Now, as many of you know, Paul Gates was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and it turned out to be that was the last assignment he was working on, and regrettably, he was not going to be able to air it. He just said there was just no way he was going to be able to complete it and get it on the air. And so he said, Robert, we're just going to have to let the Legislative Auditor's Office handle this one. Well, as I said, Miss Edmonds and Miss Dow were not real thrilled with this development. And Reverend Phillips and I also, this was 2011, we're talking 4 years ago, we were preparing for a high school reunion. And so I had gone with the full blessing of a lady named Karen Kennedy, who was the Arthritis Association, who shared the same building as the LALB, who permitted me not once, not twice, but 3 times to come into that building and go to the conference room. Not the LALB's office, the conference room that was shared by all tenants of that building to videotape, as I'm doing now. I felt that environment was a little more professional than my bedroom, which is where I am now, videotaping this. But at any rate, apparently Miss Edmonds, one time I was there on a Friday evening when she rarely came in to do some little pickup of mail or whatnot. She saw my car and she wasn't happy, and so they decided that they would contact the Attorney General's office. Yeah, going to contact the Attorney General's office. And so what happened on that? Well, the Attorney General's office said, hey, look, might be a good idea for you to bring the terrorism unit of state police out to Mr. Burns' house. If you think I'm kidding, I'm going to give you the link wherein the terrorism unit of state police did come out to my house, specifically Bart Morris and his partner. Now, when I explained to Mr. Morris, which nobody bothered with calling before this whole episode took place, of them coming and scaring the living hell out of my 83-year-old mother, okay? When I explained to him that not only had I been invited to come over, Miss Kennedy, I had permission, and he even asked, well, who opened the door for you? I said, Miss Kennedy opened the door, and he said, well, was she aware you were going to be videotaping? I said, I had the video equipment right in my hand, and I had made it clear that's why I was coming when I called her to ask if I could come and utilize the boardroom. And I will say in defense of Mr. Morris, or Trooper Morris, whatever the case, whatever the state police title is, he did apologize. He all but apologized as he walked out the door. He was in disbelief when he found out that I had the permission and the door was even opened for me. Okay, but this will give you an idea. When you're trying to conceal wrongdoing, this will give you some idea of the depths that people will go to, specifically Miss Edmonds and Miss Dow. But what is troublesome about it is the gentleman at the Attorney General's office who said this is what you ought to do. Okay? All right. Well, they decided that wasn't quite enough. And so now with the full knowledge that we're making these public records requests, Miss Edmonds and Miss Dow, they don't like this whole situation, okay? And so they decide at the May 2011 LALB meeting that look, we're gonna have the LALB procure outside legal counsel to pursue the auction licenses of Robert Burns and Freddie Phillips. And guess, I'm going to give you the clip because I don't want anybody to doubt me on this, okay? We're fixing to break away for a 2-minute clip so that you can hear Miss Anna Dow, the attorney for the Louisiana Auctioneers Licensing Board, openly state that she's wanting the board to procure outside legal counsel to pursue the auction licenses of Robert Burns and Freddie Phillips, okay? And I got to hand it to Reverend Phillips, a good friend of mine. He didn't like this, okay? And at the end, you're going to see on this clip him push her for who it is that gave her that guidance at the Attorney General's office. Let's break away for that 2-minute clip. Videos don't lie, folks. Let's see how Buddy Caldwell's office handles when we're talking about making public records requests to substantiate wrongdoing, and here is how Buddy Caldwell's office deals with such an episode. Let's break away for that 2-minute clip.
There's some issues with regard to all of this going on that have raised issues with regard to potential disciplinary actions against them, and I think that's understood. I have conferred with the Attorney General's office about this. It is our decision that I cannot handle any disciplinary action against Mr. Phillips or Mr. Burns as licensees, and that the Attorney General's office has given me some names of third-party attorneys to represent the board in these matters, and I have put calls into them, and then they will be, basically, by the time we come back in September, we will have potential attorneys to actually handle these matters for the board. That the attorneys may also have to look into the fact of the cost that has been to the board, both Ms. Edmonds having to put together how many public records requests?
Well over 35.
Okay, as well
That are
as
just for Mr. Burns and Mr. Phillips combined.
okay, and my time and efforts with regard to that should be going also to a third attorney, and also there may be some liability on the part of the board because of Mr. Phillips' activities with regard to this. And I think that the board members should consult with a third attorney, just to be clear, not an attorney general and not me, someone else who is basically a third attorney. I'll be glad to suggest, I'm going to suggest some people for the administrative procedures that may be in place. I'm going to suggest to the board that and I've gotten clearance from the Attorney General's office for the board or its representatives to meet with an attorney to discuss all of these issues, because I know some of you had questions about all of this.
I was asking Ms. Now, she said, who you contacted at the Attorney General's office?
What do you mean?
You said you contacted the Attorney
I
General's
talked to
office.
Mr. McKenzie, who is the head of the civil division.
Okay, so you just saw Buddy Caldwell's office actively saying, hey, we should go after the auction license of Reverend Freddie Lee Phillips. I was heartened when September 10th, which happened to be my birthday, came around, and it was the final day for qualifying. And it turned out that Buddy Caldwell had some competition. And though he doesn't want you to know this, there happened to be two African-American candidates running against him. One being Ike Jackson, who for whatever reason Mark Ballard has consistently failed to recognize as a candidate until he had to, till a poll came out showing he had 11%. And also Jerry Broussard Baloney. And I would submit to you that that phenomena is transpiring because of things like you're seeing here. Mr. Caldwell tends to be rather two-faced in dealing with the minority community, and I can tell you that firsthand, and I'm sure it's that source of frustration on the behalf of Ms. Broussard Baloney and also Mr. Jackson that prompts them to run in the race. And Mr. Jackson is quite outspoken in his criticism of Mr. Caldwell. And I will also tell you, and as you've just seen, Mr. Caldwell had no qualms about having his office recommend, pursuing the auction license of Reverend Freddie Phillips, whom I might add is the only African-American auctioneer in the history of the state of Louisiana. And I'll say that again. He is the only African-American auctioneer in the history of the state of Louisiana. And I can assure you he has encountered considerable turbulence as a result of that distinction. In fact, Reverend Phillips founded an auctioneer trade association called the Louisiana Association of Professional Auctioneers, and he felt that trade association's website, of which I serve as vice president, he is president, it ought to have a link to the on the Louisiana Auctioneers Licensing Board for that website, because the website exposes quite a bit of the corruption, not only of the LALB, but of the auction industry in general in Louisiana. And of course, the LALB said, get out of here, we're not even going to consider that. And so Reverend Phillips filed a complaint with Attorney General Buddy Caldwell's office. I'm going to give you a link for the complaint that he filed with that office. And Buddy Caldwell's office response was to just kick out a generic, put it back in the hands of the LALB. Do with it, and I quote, however you deem appropriate. Wow. So, for those that would believe that Mr. Caldwell will champion the causes of minorities, I'm here to tell you that is a lie, okay? It is flat out inaccurate, and I would submit to you that that is why he has two African-American opponents, and it warms my heart greatly when this is my sample ballot, they now have them out, and it heartened me greatly to see. Now, more recently, Buddy Caldwell, along with all the AG candidates, were invited to a debate forum by the Baton Rouge Press Club. Mr. Caldwell was the only holdout, and that had a domino effect, and I can tell you right now, Mr. Caldwell would have been ill prepared to handle some of the questions that would have come his way, entailing some of the issues that I have discussed, because I can tell you right now, he has no answers, okay? To quote a phrase from Ronald Reagan back in 1980, Buddy Caldwell is not running on his record, he's running from his record. And he's hoping that the Louisiana electorate can stay ignorant of just the utter corruption, the utter incompetence of that office. Because those are the two words that describe it, corrupt and incompetent. Reverend Phillips astutely said, hey, I want to know who you spoke with at the Attorney General's office, and Miss Dow volunteered. It was Mr. Richard Majimsey, okay, the head of the Civil Division. Oh, Mr. Richard Majimsey's the one who said, y'all need to get outside legal counsel to look at pursuing the auction licenses of Robert Burns and Freddie Phillips. Wow, that's interesting, because it was also Mr. Majimsey who advocated bringing out the terrorism unit of state police to my home. Now, as everyone who's looked at the other episodes are aware, I am following the CNSI trial. And right now, one of the latest filings is that the CNSI attorneys want to take the depositions of some folk that were key players in that whole disastrous, ill-advised canceling of the CNSI contract that, in my opinion, is going to cost this taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. And when you book it, when this trial is over, we're going to be writing a big-time check to CNSI. You can take it to the bank, all right? Well, guess who one of the ones they want so desperately to subpoena to bring in for a deposition? Rick Majimsey. Apparently, he played one of the key roles of making the decision to cancel the CNSI contract. So now we've got Mr. Majimsey, by Ms. Dow's own admission, saying we're going to supply the names of attorneys to go after Mr. Burns and Mr. Phillips as his auction license. In fact, you heard Ms. Dow said, I think that's understood. In other words, it's just what's expected. And you heard Ms. Edmonds say it was because we had made upwards of 35 public records requests. Okay. So there's your criminality, okay? She's out here committing blatant payroll fraud. That was the words Patrick Lowry utilized. We're supplying the information to the Legislative Auditor's Office, and they don't like us making these public records requests. And the Attorney General says, we got you back. We got you back. We're going to get an outside legal counsel in there to see about going after the auction licenses of Robert Burns and Freddie Phillips. Now, let me just say one other thing. I told you I was going to be mentioning quite a few names at the Attorney General's office. You've just heard the name Rick Majimsey. Let me introduce another name. Rodney Ramsey. He's an assistant Attorney General at Buddy Caldwell's office. Okay, so let's talk about Rodney Ramsey. He is the Assistant Attorney General that I mentioned to you. Buddy Caldwell decided he needed to get some eyes and ears into both the LALB meetings and the Interior Design Board meetings. And I have Mr. Rodney Ramsey's photo up at the top of this post because he started making himself quite the repetitive attendee at Interior Design Board meetings and LALB meetings, all right? Well, I'm also going to tell you, in October of 2011, Mr. Rodney Ramsey was presented with incredible detail of the payroll fraud going on the part of Miss Edmonds. In fact, he was presented with 52 pages which outline that payroll fraud, and that doesn't include the supporting schedules, which numbered in excess of that, all right? This was the same material that the Legislative Auditor's Office got, okay? And Mr. Rodney Ramsey was made aware of the fact there was a Legislative Auditor's investigation going on. All of this is October of 2011. We're talking about October of 2011, okay? And Buddy Caldwell's office just kept right on saying, hey, we need to get us an attorney in there that'll go after at least one, cut off at the throat. You'll probably end this thing, all right? Well, the Legislative Auditor's Office came out with their damning report on February the 29th of 2012, all right? And even with the knowledge of the Legislative Auditor's report, and by the way, Darryl Pepera felt strongly enough that there were improprieties going on here that he forwarded all his findings to Hiller Moore's office for potential criminal prosecution against Miss Edmonds, okay? And then I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but they subsequently forwarded it on to the Inspector General's office. But let's pause for just a moment, because we're at February 29th, 2012, all right? And I'll give you the link for the Legislative Auditor's Office report, all right? Well, true to form, Buddy Caldwell charges ahead with all this knowledge, okay, except that he may not have known that Hiller Moore had been provided with it by Darryl Pepera to potentially pursue criminally. Nevertheless, they went straight on ahead, said we're going to get that outside counsel to go after Robert Burns's auction license, okay? And who did Buddy Caldwell say, hey, this is who you're going to hire? All right, well, none other than convicted felon Larry S. Bankston, a gentleman that has served 33 months in federal prison for accepting a bribe while he served as a state senator. But if anyone knows anything about Louisiana politics, you will know that the Bankston name is probably one of the most dominant names in the Democratic Party within the state of Louisiana. And his father was long time one of the highest ranking authorities and power brokers, if you will, in the Democratic Party. And of course, we all know that Buddy Caldwell has always been a Democrat. He still is, even though he carries the name Republican. And by the way, for full disclosure, I'm a libertarian, so you're not going to tag me with Democrat or Republican. But I'm making my point that Buddy Caldwell's allegiance to Mr. Bankston prompted him to say that, hey, LALB, this is who you're going to hire to go after Robert Burns's auction license. Now, some of you out there may be saying, I don't believe all this. Well, I'm going to give you just a little, 25, 30-second clip. This hearing lasted for hours. I'm going to give you just a 25 or 30-second clip from the hearing entailing going after my lawsuit, my auction license, with regard to Miss Edmonds' payroll fraud. You're going to hear Mr. Bankston say he wants to, you've asserted she's committing blatant payroll fraud. I quickly told him those weren't my words, all right? And then you're going to hear him say, there's no question. That is false and misleading. Wow. Of course, he didn't have the benefit of the knowledge that there was a criminal investigation going on about Miss Edmonds at the time that he made this utterly profound pronouncement. And the AG's office, I assume, they've got their head in the sand or whatever, or they're so hell-bent on cramming corruption down the people of Louisiana's throats that they didn't give two flying flips, and I'm going to bet it's the latter, okay? Because Buddy Caldwell is one of the most, if not the most, corrupt people I've ever met in my life. Now let's break away for that little clip entailing Mr. Bankston.
In reference to Ms. Edmonds and the issue of her employment, you were of the belief that she is involved with blatant payroll fraud, is that correct?
Those were not my words.
Providing false and misleading information with the intent to try to create the impression that the executive director of this association has been involved with blatant payroll fraud. There's no question that that's false and misleading.
All right, you just saw it. So when they wrapped up this Mickey Mouse three-ring circus hearing entailing my auction license, which by the way had absolutely nothing to do with any auction I ever conducted, and my attorney, Robert Lauren Kleinpeter, made that crystal clear to them, but then they said, oh, we're going to go into executive session, and I said, the hell you are. You know, I said, I have the right to insist that it take place in the open. I had my attorney invoke that right. You'll clearly see on this video clip, it's only about a 30-second clip I'm about to give you, but you're going to see now I've started mentioning some people from the Attorney General's office. We talked about Richard Majimsey. Okay, there was one going to cram that, going after the license, going to give the list of attorneys. Turns out to be Mr. Bankston. We talked about Rodney Ramsey, you know, who, despite getting all of this information about the payroll fraud, said, we're charging forward, okay? All right, now we've got two gentlemen sitting at this hearing, and I have their photos up in the top of this post. One of them's name is Michael Vallon. He would happen to be the African American of the two sitting there. The other gentleman, I don't have a clue who he is, okay? Best I could tell, he was along for the ride. I don't know if he was there to help ensure things went well. I don't know if he was being trained. I don't know. I have a clue who he is. He never introduced himself to me. But Mr. Michael Vallon, who was clearly in charge of everything, made a definitive statement that the board would be going into executive session. So let's break away this. Now we're talking about, I talked about, you know, not knowing what the hell you're doing, and this is a case of it right here. All right, we've already talked about Richard Majimsey. We've already talked about Rodney Ramsey. So now let's go on to Mr. Michael Vallon, and let's hear him utter the exact opposite of what Louisiana Revised Statute 4217A1 says. Here's a little clip of that.
Second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, we're in.
To that, I think that he has the right for it to be heard in an open session if he wants to.
Well, he has the right, they have a right to go into executive session to discuss character, and other type of issues. He has the right to have those issues outside of that realm to be heard in an open session. So we're going to go into executive session to discuss character issues. Once we come out of the executive session, we'll be able to discuss other issues outside of that. Also, before we adjourn.
All right, so you just heard Michael Vallon absolutely, I mean, completely obliterating what 4217A1 says, and I did file a lawsuit for an open meetings violation because it clearly was. The trial court said, oh, the Attorney General's office gave some bad advice, so we can't hold the board members. They can't say they knowingly and willfully violated the law. Oh, this Attorney General whom they hired, you know, and despite the fact that I told those board members numerous times, do not go behind closed doors to discuss my character, and I did appeal it to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and that panel did agree. They also said, yeah, well, the Attorney General's office screwed up here. What's new? The Attorney General's office screws up left and right. I'm wondering when the hell they ever do anything right, okay? All right, I told you about the witness tampering, you know, the evidence tampering. We obviously either don't know the open meetings law, they don't, or they adamantly insist on doing the opposite. There's no other explanation for it. So, okay, we got more lack of knowledge on the Attorney General's part. Now, this is September of 2012, okay? And, you know, I was instructed to keep quiet about any criminal investigation of Miss Edmonds, and I did so. Ultimately, the Inspector General's office contacted me toward the end of 2012. It was right around December 27th of 2012. And they said, look, we're going to be conducting a criminal investigation on Miss Edmonds, and we want you to assist in that regard. And so I agreed to do so. Also, Reverend Phillips agreed to do so. We both sat in that Inspector General's meeting. And I can tell you that Robert Chadwick, as well as Tom Bolton, who was the head of the Investigations Division at the Inspector General's office, and he flatly said that this whole idea of Miss Edmonds having a performance-based agreement was illegal. Okay? He said, you cannot say that, oh, well, I didn't work any this week at all, yet I claimed I worked 25 hours or 15 hours, whichever the case for which agency, but then I'll be very busy during renewal season and it'll all balance out. He flatly said that that is illegal and that it is payroll fraud, just as Mr. Lowry, Patrick Lowry, had said with civil service. And so, in early 2013, the Inspector General's office commenced with the investigation that I've told you about, and they asked for myself to play a key role in assisting them in that investigation, and I was only too happy to do so. And let me just say this, 4 months into that investigation, by happenstance, the LALB happened to be having a hearing on a gentleman named Ken Bueller, who is a notoriously problematic auctioneer who has caused numerous problems in the auction industry. And I'm going to give you a link just for reference purposes that will provide you with far more information with regard to Mr. Bueller. But the reason that I bring up the fact that him having a hearing is because I'm going to now introduce to you yet another episode of Attorney General James D. Putty Caldwell having folk that seem incapable of using a little bit of common sense. This time we're going to reference another Assistant Attorney General. Her name is Miss Lindsay Hunter. Lindsay Hunter. All right, now, in this hearing, and we're going to show you a little video clip of it, Mr. Brantley, Beaver Brantley, Joseph Beaver Brantley, he likes to go by Beaver, who served as Ken Bueller's defense attorney, didn't like the idea of me being in the room, didn't like the idea of me videotaping, and so he said, hey, we want to sequester all potential non-party witnesses, and he specifically named me. I objected vehemently, saying I was not served with any subpoena and that I was there to observe the proceedings and never been made put on notice that I may be called upon for any kind of testimony. And Miss Hunter took this bold step of issuing an on-the-fly oral instanter subpoena. And she then ordered me out of the room to be sequestered as Mr. Brantley had requested. Let's take a quick little video clip so you can see that episode, and you'll also see the reaction that I had, and also just what happened at the point they wanted to call me as a witness. Let's take a brief breakaway and let you see that clip.
Questions or motions that need to be taken care of before we begin?
Yes, I'd like to sequester all non-party witnesses.
Okay.
And particularly, I think Mr. Robert Burns is potentially a non-party witness.
Okay.
That could sequester. Anybody else is non-party witness? Jim and Ann.
Mr. Bankson, do you have any opposition to that? No. All right, then we'd like all these people who are non-party witnesses to be out in the hall.
I'm going to state that I did speak with an attorney about the very possibility of this. I was not subpoenaed. I'm here strictly in the capacity to observe this. So I don't think the board has the grounds, neither did he, for this.
You're not a subpoenaed witness, but
We asked for an instander subpoena.
What's that?
An instanta subpoena, which means they can call you at any time. What does that mean? Yes.
okay, we'll grant that request. If you want to hand your video camera over to somebody else, we'll take it. But when all non-party witnesses to step in the hall, we'll have the officer retrieve you as you're called for testimony. Any other attorney questions? Okay, thank you. Step down.
Thank you. Robert Burns. Burns.
Did you get Mr. Burns? off?
He's left, that.
He's not here.
He's not here, he left.
He left, he was under subpoena.
I don't think he had a subpoena.
Oh, you did?
Well, you'll have to take that up with him.
Get it back on.
Indications.
Mr.
Ms. Hunter,
Yes.
for clarification, what does it mean when a witness leaves when he's under subpoena? I have no idea.
Well, he's failed to comply with the subpoena. I think under the Administrative Procedure Act, you have to have the 19th JDC enforce that. There's nothing we can do today. If it prejudices your case significantly, then that's another issue.
I think with regard to the board, anyway, as far as I'm concerned, I think we have enough to adjudicate this matter today, rather than holding it open for the litigants. I don't think it's
Yeah,
fair to the litigants.
I would ask that we not hold it open, but I would ask that the board give us authority to seek whatever authority we can.
I would so move.
Is there a second on that
So
motion?
moved.
Any discussion? Any
Was
discussion
that
on
Mr.
the?
Mack?
Mr. Mack has the motion.
Is there any discussion on the motion to allow Mr. Bankston to seek remedies for his
No,
failure?
we all moved that he should do
All
that.
right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, you have that authority.
All right, so let me just say this. Once I was vanquished out into the hallway as a, quote, sequestered non-party witness, I called Mr. Chadwick, who was the lead investigator at the Inspector General's office conducting the Edmonds investigations, and he said he did not want me testifying before the LALB as they were under active investigation, and he did not want me testifying. Likewise, I called my own attorney, and he said, you were never served with a written subpoena. They do not have any basis upon which they can compel your testimony. Walk away. And that's what I did. And that's why you saw in that clip them being baffled at, oh, well, he left. Oh, he violated this instanter subpoena. Okay. All right. So the next meeting, the very next meeting, if you'll notice, Miss Hunter took it a step further. I mean, she's bold, and boy, she's Miss I am the authority here. Of course, she was operating under the mandate from Buddy Caldwell to find a way to try to put a nuzzle over me, and it's not going to work. It didn't work then, and it never will work. Okay? Mr. Caldwell, it isn't going to work. But at any rate, they decided that at the very next LALB meeting, they would conduct it at a different venue. Mr. Caldwell said, hey, we're going to have the next meeting. We're going to put a little bit have him have a come to Jesus meeting. We're going to have him over here in our own conference room, the Attorney General's conference room. Yes, sir. That's where they held that next meeting. And by the way, Miss Hunter had said, hey, y'all can pursue him in 19th Judicial District Court for having violated my instanter subpoena. All right. Well, so when it came time for that next meeting at the Attorney General's office, which was May of 2013, or May of 2013 or July 2013, I can't remember which. Anyway, it was the next meeting, and you're going to see, and by the way, before the meeting, Miss Dow and Miss Edmonds engaged in a little dog and pony show. Miss Edmonds said, Miss Dow, do you have any idea why we're meeting over here? And Miss Dow just said, oh, well, from what I understand, our regular venue, which is the Louisiana Municipal Association, it wasn't available. You know, well, I'm here to tell you I had called the Louisiana Municipal Association beforehand, and it darn sure was available. So I guess these folks figured I just fell off the turnip truck. So I was well aware that this whole thing was an intimidation tactic by Mr. Caldwell, and you're going to see me go toe-to-toe with Mr. Caldwell's hand-picked man to pursue me, none other than convicted felon Larry S. Bankston. So let's break away, and we'll see the little episode of myself and convicted felon Larry S. Bankston going toe-to-toe over me vacating the prior meeting and me having left. Here's that clip for you.
You were present on March 26, 2013, when the board had its administrative adjudicatory hearing, correct?
That is correct.
And you were in the room and present when the hearing officer issued an instanter subpoena for you to testify at that meeting.
She issued an oral instanter subpoena, and I was present.
And you left.
I sure did.
And can you explain to the board why you left?
Because the board did not follow the proper procedure for issuing the subpoena.
There was well over 60 days available that Mr. Brantley could have made an oral request of you, and you properly served me just as you did on May the 7th, which is why I am here. In my humble opinion, Ms. Hunter had no authority to issue the subpoena. The board can do that. There was not even a vote taken, and Mr. McMillan gave the impression that there was this written subpoena. I've yet to see a document where I'm subpoenaed.
So it's your legal opinion.
It is my
Your
opinion.
legal opinion that Ms. Hunter did not have the legal authority to issue the subpoena.
I think that it's going to be an interesting point of contention, yes.
And is there a reason why you didn't want to testify that day? You're here every day, you're here at every meeting, you're here at every instance. Why were you not willing to testify that day?
You are not going to randomly pluck me out of the audience and say, you're now going to testify. If the episode repeats itself, I will repeat the performance. If you want me to testify, issue the subpoena, and I will be here.
You're here every time we have a meeting. So it's your decision when you want to.
No, sir. There are legal procedures to be followed. This board, it takes all of about 3 minutes. Ms. Dowell's standard form, you just change the name, you spit out the date. It's not as if this thing was thrown together in 2 minutes' time. This board had ample opportunity to have issued such a written subpoena. It failed to do so. I'm going on the assumption Mr. Brantley did not make a request for this board to do so. If he did and the board failed to acknowledge his request, then that would be on them. But you are not going to pluck me out of the audience and just say, here, have a seat. We're going to start asking you questions.
And let me ask you this.
All right, so since the LALB had filed this writ of attachment, you might be curious as to how that came out. Well, I'm going to give you a direct link to the ruling that Judge Hernandez made in that case. And I called my attorney and said, look, what about this whole situation? He said, Robert, you don't even need me. He said, this is so easy, you can knock it out. And I drafted a 3-page opposition memorandum. I'll give you a link to that 3-page opposition memorandum. And yes, Judge Hernandez said, the subpoena in question has now been served. LALB, the next time you want me to testify, you darn well better issue the written subpoena, okay? It's not like this is first-year jurisprudence that Mr. Bankson certainly has not forgotten, but they choose to, we're going to do whatever we want. Well, no, you're not, okay? Go back and look into that, very elementary jurisprudence procedures for following the law and issue a written subpoena, and I will be there. You pull this kind of a, we're going to have an oral instance, and I'm going to do the same thing again, and not only am I going to walk out, next time I'm suing you for denying me the right to having been able to attend that meeting when you had no grounds. You want me to testify? Issue the written subpoena like you know you're supposed to do, Mr. Bankson, and that goes triple for you, Mr. Caldwell. Of course, I know you don't do very many things according to Hall. We know that. That's why you've gotten us in the mess we're in with the CNSI trace. All righty. Okay. I want to kind of wrap this up by just making one more statement about another party at the Attorney General's office, and that would be Assistant Attorney General Arthur Auger. All right. Now, as would be obvious, I monitor LALB activities, and I'm just going to tell you right now that Mr. Auger, let me first of all say there was a lady named Miss Story. She's an 83-year-old widow, and briefly, she had a hearing. It was one of the most absolutely egregious victimizations of any auction client, much less an 83-year-old widow. And of course, the LALB in its bend over for auctioneer mentality found the auctioneer guilty of nothing. And I'm telling you, these violations were egregious, okay? And so she left quite disheartened. She cried, and I spoke with her on several occasions. She did opt to file a complaint with the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General's office did a little perfunctory exercise, because I would submit to you that Mr. Caldwell is not really interested in helping victimizations of this kind of thing, be they elderly or otherwise. And so they sent a gentleman named Arthur Auger out there to go through a little perfunctory meeting with Miss Story, and he said, look, there's no question you've been wrong. Now, I am I am quoting what she says that Mr. OJ said. Obviously, that makes it hearsay. If we were in a court of law, and it wouldn't be admissible. But since we're not in a court of law, I'm going to relay what she indicated that Mr. OJ said. She said that Mr. OJ said that obviously she was wronged, but there wasn't going to be anything the Attorney General's office could do for her unless they can establish a pattern amongst the victim of the elderly. So in other words, too bad you've been screwed, glued, and tattooed, and we can't do anything for you. And I would submit that is wrong. It's not that they can't do anything for her, it's that they won't do anything for her, okay? But myself and Reverend Freddie Phillips with the Louisiana Association of Professional Auctioneers, LAPA, we don't stand for this kind of thing. So I worked extensively with her. She drafted a pro se lawsuit in 36 Judicial District Court. I provided her with what I believed would be beneficial questions based on what she told me had transpired. I typed them up for her. And we had a little mock trial the night before. And I played the role of Marlo Schmidt. And I'm going to tell you something. Miss Story went into that courtroom ready for bear, okay? And she knocked it out of the park. And she got a $4,102.29 judgment against that auctioneer, but yet there was nothing the AG's office could do about it. Not only did she get the judge didn't even allow, she said she would allow, Martha O'Neill was the judge, she said she would allow the other side, the auctioneer, to present his case, but she said, and I quote, "You're not going to be able to undo the damage you've already done up on this witness stand," unquote. He made a statement that, well, this is the way he handled all his auctions, and she said, well, you're darn lucky this is the first time you've been sued. But why did I say all that? It's because while Attorney General Caldwell can't see fit to help an 83-year-old widow, boy, you pull up his December 31st, 2014 campaign finance report, and you see how many contributions he got from auto body shops, okay? He only had about $32,000 in contributions for the year 2014. Almost every dime of it came from auto body shops. Now, why were they so generous to Mr. Caldwell? Well, it was because Mr. Caldwell, seeing that he could get a ton of money and buy some votes, saw fit to sue State Farm. And so while he can't help an 82-year-old elderly victimized lady, he's got time to file suit on behalf of these auto body shops because of the rich rewarding that they will do to his campaign treasurer. And I would submit to you that while Mr. Caldwell, serving in the defense capacity for things like the Louisiana Cosmetology Board, can rack up hundreds of thousands of dollars of defense litigation to enrich his friends like Wade shows, he can stall that kind of litigation out ad infinitum, ad nauseum, okay? But when it turns around and he decides he's going to be the aggressor, which I would submit he had no business doing in that lawsuit against State Farm, he doesn't like the pace of it. So what does he do? He transfers it to a state over in Florida to speed things along, okay? And to get this thing expedited, because that's the way Mr. Caldwell operates, okay? All right, now, I'm going to wrap this up by saying prior to 2009, I had never even met Buddy Caldwell. But I saw him for the first time in 2009 when I was at a legislative hearing. I was there on behalf of a bill that would have stripped continuing education from auctioneers. I didn't think that was a good idea because if you're going to consider yourself a professional, I believe continuing education is something that ought to be included in any professional field. But be that as it may, we were there early, and there was a bill being introduced, and it was by the Attorney General's office, and it called for a 10-cent a month increase in your phone bill. And Buddy Caldwell was going to be utilizing those funds for going after child pornography on the internet. And Lord, this is the first I knew of Buddy Caldwell, and I said, well, this is tremendous. I mean, this is incredible that this man is doing this, and I applaud him for it. I didn't know anything about Buddy Caldwell, okay? And what I thought ought to be a 5 or 10 minute hearing, because I just thought this would be open and shut, it would get done, and that would be that. Well, let me tell you, we were there for 3 hours waiting for us to be able to say something on our bill because these legislators were just absolutely grilling Buddy Caldwell, okay? They were grilling him, and we're talking about a dime. We're talking about 10 cents. And I mean, I'm going to be blunt about it. I was sort of incredulous. They defeated it. It didn't make it out of committee. And I thought 3 hours, we're talking about a dime, to fight child pornography, and yet this bill went down in flames and the legislators raked Buddy Caldwell over the coals. I now know why they did that, okay? They knew back then what I did not know about Buddy Caldwell, okay? And that is, they didn't trust him. It wasn't the issue of it being a dime, so they did not trust him to do what he was purporting he would do with the money. And I'm going to tell you, with the benefit of 6 years of hindsight and my dealings with Buddy Caldwell's office, I applaud those legislators for standing firm and refusing to put in a dime increase. I wouldn't vote for a 1 cent increase going to Buddy Caldwell's office. And I want to just wrap this up in conclusion in saying that the chairman of that committee, Miss Duplessis, Ann Duplessis, she got frustrated with Caldwell. He went to go to wrap things up, and she said, I'm not going to let you put on another show. Well, again, I didn't know anything about Buddy Caldwell, and so I asked my friend, I said, well, what's she talking about? And my friend says, oh, he does Elvis Presley impersonations. Well, yes, so my friend said that Buddy Caldwell would do Elvis Presley impersonations, and that was the first that I have heard of that, but since in doing a little bit of research, I know that his mother apparently taught opera, and he quite fancies himself as being a very good Elvis impersonator. So I'm going to conclude this whole video expose, if you will, the whole 5-part series, just to show that, I can be a good sport about all this. I'm going to go ahead and do that song. Now, I'm not going to have Senator Mary Landrieu for me to be able to serenade, but I'm a good sport about all this, so I'm going to go ahead and, without the benefit of any backup singer, without the benefit of any music to cue up, I'm going to go ahead and end on a note that I hope Buddy Caldwell will be most pleased with. So here we go. Wise men say only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you. Shall I stay? Would it be a sin if I can't help falling in love with you? Like a river flows surely to the sea, darling, so it goes. Some things are meant to be. Take my hand, take my whole life too, for I can't help falling in love with you. Like a river flows surely to the sea, darling, so it goes. Some things are meant to be. Take my hand, take my whole life too, for I can't help falling in love with you. For those of you who may have endured that, I want to thank you. I want to thank all of you who tuned in for any segment of this sound off feature that I have provided with regard to Attorney James D. Buddy Caldwell. I'll wrap it up by saying, okay, that it's very obvious. Anyone viewing this would know that I am no Buddy Caldwell fan. I think that goes without saying. I'd like to just conclude by saying that, a lot of times people can make little quip remarks and things with regard to a political election. I think you would have to agree, I have not done that. I did not put together the material that I put for this 5-part series. I did not just put it together on a napkin and just throw it together in 5 minutes time. I was a federal fraud investigator for 6 years. I am a highly detailed person, and that's why I went to the excruciating detail that I did to substantiate that Mr. Caldwell is very simply corrupt. I mean, I'm not going to wince for words. There is no other way to describe it. And I have gone to great lengths to substantiate that, because it's not a statement that I make in a lighthearted fashion. It's not something that I take great joy in making, but I am going to call a spade, okay? Mr. Caldwell, you may be a great person to sit down and have a beer with, I don't know. But I can tell you that your leadership, your ethics, and the way you conduct the operations of the Attorney General's office, in my assessment, leave a whole lot to be desired. And so I guess the next question would be, well, who do you support? And right now I am just encouraging anybody to vote for any candidate but Buddy Caldwell, okay? Because of the two, at least that the polls show, indicating the stiffest opposition to Mr. Caldwell, that being Jeff Landry, the officially endorsed candidate of the Louisiana Republican Party, and also Ike Jackson, who I think poses a very serious threat to Mr. Caldwell. It is our intention within this House, so I'm gonna propose we split the votes up, because I will be blunt about it. I am trying to squeeze Mr. Caldwell out of this race, out of the runoff. It's much like in a basketball game. For the basketball fans out there, the ball's just been inbounded, and as the coach, I'm trying to trap the ball handler into a corner, and I don't really care who swipes the ball free. I just want the ball out of Buddy Caldwell's hands, because I think he's dangerous with the ball. I'm just going to be blunt about it. Now, if the election were to come down to, in a runoff, Jeff Landry and Ike Jackson, I guess the obvious question is, well, who are you going to support? And I will answer that question. I'm going to support Jeff Landry. I think anybody who goes to my Facebook pages would show that. But I will say this, if Ike Jackson ends up being the elected Attorney General, I have spoken with him. I am very impressed with him. I'm very impressed with his integrity and his honesty in the questions that I have posed of him, and I believe that he would make a good Attorney General. Okay, he may be a little left of my positions, and quite frankly, Jeff Landry is a little right of my positions, but my number one goal is getting a candidate in that office that will exhibit honesty, integrity, and ethics, and in my assessment, they've been sorely lacking under a one James Buddy Caldwell. Thank you so much for those of you who took the time to watch any segment of these. I would encourage anybody, if you have the time, to watch them all, because I have put a pretty decent amount of effort into them, and they represent my feelings. And thank you once again. After October 24th, we'll just have to see where everything stands, and not just with the Attorney General's race, but with other races as well. And whomever you are, I hope your candidate wins. I am pulling for one to get knocked out. That's my only goal for October 24th with regard to the Attorney General's race. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope everyone wakes up with a big smile on their face on October 25th. I know that can't happen, but you can always wish it at any rate. Thank you so much.